I'm very pleased to welcome you here to the Hopkins Bloomberg Center and Johns Hopkins SAIS. I'm Jim Steinberg, the Dean of SAIS, and I'm very excited to introduce you to Cameron Abadi and Adam Tooze. They are the hosts of Foreign Policy's, I'm told, wildly successful podcast, and I'm pretty sure that's correct, Ones and Twos. Launched 2 years ago and millions of downloads today, which is really quite impressive. I think the fact that you're all here means you have a fair degree of familiarity with the basic format, which is they took a look at an economic data point, which can be something ranging from the GDP of China or the number of hot dogs sold in the United States in a given year, and then discuss what it means for the rest of the world, and especially the hot dogs. You can imagine why that would be important. For me in particular, it's a great pleasure to have Adam here. Adam, I think, is one of the most influential and consequential voices in the public sphere today on a range of issues. And although he is steeped in economics, and economics is the focus of the podcast, as I think you all know, he's trained as a historian. And for those of us who teach a lot of history, somebody whom we've learned an enormous amount for and have an enormous amount of respect. He's a professor of economic history at Columbia University, but his erudition goes much deeper than that and really covers a great range of stuff. And I will give an unashamed promo here, which is I read exactly one blog, and I subscribe to exactly one blog, and that is Chartbook. It is the only one that I read, Adam. Because it is so informative, it's so stimulating, and what I think we really appreciate here as an interdisciplinary school is the fact that it brings these different perspectives together. It is not a prisoner of any one academic discipline. So really great to have you here. And of course, with him is his co-host, Cameron Abadi, who's the deputy editor at Foreign Policy and Adam's direct editor. He also edits many of the other prominent columns at Foreign Policy, including Steve Walton, Stephen Cook. Steve Walton and I have some interesting conversations over the years, but another influential voice, and Steve Cook, a friend and colleague of mine from my Brookings days. So really quite a great lineup that you have there at FP. He lives in Berlin, and that's where our colleague Michael Portillo. Michael, where are you? There you are. Sorry. First approached him about doing the show here in DC about a year ago, and kudos to you, Michael. I mean, it really is the hallmark of what SAIS students do, is that kind of initiative and entrepreneurship that make these kinds of things happen. And so it is a very special thing that you have done for us, and thank you for making this all happen. So you're not here to hear me, you're here to hear them. So again, join me in a warm welcome, and I really look forward to the show.
Thank you very much, Dean Steinberg. It is great to be here at the Hopkins Bloomberg Center at Johns Hopkins University. You know, we love doing these live events. We've done a couple of in Berlin, in Germany, one in New York. And yeah, it's always especially great to see our listeners, to hear from them in person. In fact, we always do a Q&A portion, and we will definitely do that here tonight. So, you can start thinking of those questions ahead of time. But the other reason we like doing these is that, it helps us think about what we should talk about. We tend to do something that's locally based when we do these live events. That's why we thought about doing something related to the U.S. presidential election. I've been here about 24 hours. I've already overheard various conversations about the election, just eavesdropping at breakfast this morning. We'll talk a little bit about Joe Biden's economic record and some about Donald Trump's policy plans and his campaign. But then we thought we could also do something even more local than that. As I mentioned, we're at the Hopkins Bloomberg Center, and so we thought, why not talk about Michael Bloomberg himself? Maybe if we have time, we'll throw in another name. I'll leave that in reserve, depending on how timing looks. But for now, Biden, Trump, and Bloomberg. and then the Q&A. So, but as is often the case with our podcast, we like to start off with something that's even directly drawn from the news. And so I thought we could start with the news this past weekend in the Middle East. You know, since Israel attacked Iran's consulate in Damascus, killing several revolutionary guards, and then the Iranian response to that attack in the form of hundreds of drones and missiles fired at Israel last weekend, there's been a lot of talk of a widening war in the Middle East, and obviously a conflict of that kind could have huge economic repercussions. In the Substack you write, the one that Dean Steinberg subscribes to, the only one he subscribes to, you talked about this recently. You wrote about this and how the way I interpreted what you wrote is that the United States seems to be best placed to benefit from a war of this kind, at least relative to others. And I'm curious if you could sort of describe, if there is economic fallout from this widening conflict, why would the United States be well placed relatively, and is that a matter of its strength or weaknesses of other countries right now in that context?
Yeah, it's first of all, let me say it's wonderful to be here, and thank you so much for the overly generous introduction. It really is a pleasure, and wow, what a space you have here. I think it's important to be careful in our phrasing here and not to say, you know, America benefits from this crisis. You can see, I think one could see how easily that would be spun in an instrumentalizing direction. And there's all sorts of kind of conspiracy theory about war in which people benefit and that's why they happen and so on. I don't think that wouldn't be my argument. But I think there is a structural element in the global economy which is worth thinking about and is revealed again and again by crises like this. And it's the talk of the spring week meetings, IMF, World Bank going on in this town right now as well, which is that when there is uncertainty in the world economy, folks look for safe havens. And the safe haven of choice is the dollar. It still is the dollar. And so in a crisis like this, the tendency is for the dollar to strengthen. And that is the basic logic, which then exerts pressure on other economies around the world. And it comes at a very inopportune moment because of the latest inflation data out of the US. The markets have gone through this sudden lurching reassessment of the direction in which interest rates are going to move this year. Because they had convinced themselves that the economy was slowing down quite fast. It was going to be a soft landing, but nevertheless it was slowing down quite fast. And so the Fed would be able to cut maybe as many as 5 times this year. And then some hot inflation numbers came in the last couple of weeks. And so we have this weird disjuncture between the sort of shocking violence in the Middle East on the one hand and the subtlety of bond market hermeneutics on the other. And both of them drive you in the same direction, which is that everyone wants to move their money into the dollar. Because the interest rate will stay higher if the inflation rate is marginally higher. And in a state of uncertainty around the world, people run into the dollar, and those two things work together. And I was in Brazil a couple of weeks ago. We did a show from there, and even there in their central bank, they're immediately talking about it. They've had to intervene 2 weeks running to try and to prevent their currency devaluing. And I was speaking to Hung Song Shin of the BIS today, and he was saying the interventions in Asia are even more dramatic. So the Indonesians, Japanese, South Koreans in various ways are all under pressure from this strengthening dollar. And then you add another element into this, which is oil prices, which haven't rocketed the way that people expected, but are definitely trending up. And the serious talk now of oil in the high 90s or even over $100 a barrel. And once upon a time, that used to have an effect on the US in which the dollar would depreciate if the oil price went up, because people buy the oil in dollars, and there was an offsetting effect in the global market, whereas the dollar went up, the sellers had to offer, or rather, there was a kind of logic that the price could go up only if the dollar went down, right? If the dollar was strong and the oil price was too high, then the oil just became unaffordable. And we're now in a regime in which, because America is the largest oil exporter, when the oil price goes up, America's currency actually strengthens. So you put all those three things together, interest rates higher for longer, the dollar's stronger, and oil high and commodity prices generally high, and not just, you know, emerging markets like Brazil, but the entire world will be squeaking under the pressure of this. And there's kind of offsetting effects on the American side. A strong dollar is not great for the manufacturing lobby, and there's a big manufacturing lobby in this town now. So there's an offsetting effect there. But Texas and Pennsylvania are doing great out of the oil boom. The banks are doing well with the higher interest rates, and the American economy is so buoyant it appears to be able to withstand the pressure, whilst in Europe, the macroeconomics are terrible right now, and the ECB, if it wants to cut interest rates to support the European economy, will be faced with a gap between European and American interest rates, and then the euro slides, and they don't like that because it feeds inflationary pressure inside Europe. So that's what we mean about this being a moment where a lot of really subtle forces around interest rates run into this nasty shock. Mercifully, so far, it hasn't turned out to be a really big one. And the combination of those two really rather different dynamics, one very subtle, one kind of complicated, and the other one involving drones and rockets and everything, produce a very nasty configuration.
Okay, yeah. So bond market hermeneutics, first of all.
Yeah, it's very, if you listen to these people.
I was thinking that's just a good band name.
Really
I don't
kind
know.
of, yeah, it would be good.
But I do want to, clarify. It sounds like what you're saying is, as a general rule, does this mean that when there is conflict, the American dollar strengthens, and in various ways it is good for the American economy? For all the anxiety we all feel when we read the news and we see there's a conflict, we hear about, instability, like, do the people really deep in the people in the economy who are really working on these things day in and day out, kind of, are they relaxed about it in terms of the economic effects? They know that it's going to be okay for the United States, ultimately?
It's even more twisted than that. Even if the crisis starts and originates in the United States, the dollar generally strengthens.
Okay, so
it's absolutely mind-blowing. Yeah, America has not experienced. You are on the wrong end of the world economy when you experience what you might expect to be the more natural logic, which is bad news causes people to run out. Another way of defining America's exorbitant privilege is that bad news causes people to run towards the United States still in the economic system. When that doesn't happen, you're in the British position, like September, the Liz Truss scenario, right? That's when bad news feeds a run out, and your response to the bad news can often feed the panic because it looks like you're panicking, whereas America is on the soft end of this entire dynamic. And yeah, I have to say, the American policymakers I've seen in the last couple of days are some of the most chill people
exactly.
Is there going to be a recession? No, there's not going to be a recession. Do we get to cut 5 times? Probably not. We'll probably get to cut 2 times. Can we cut a lot right now? No, but maybe one more time before the election. The talk is all about the political disturbance, but the economy looks Goldilocks. AI is good. The energy story is good for large parts of the US economy. The migration story is good for inflation. It's really bad politically from Biden's point of view. But no, it's a very different mood from last year when there was quite serious worry about the banking system. And
there we go. Okay, that's a new motto for America: tails we win. Heads we win, tails you lose. Rather than in God we trust or whatever. But the other news this morning, in fact, was that the Biden administration is imposing sanctions on Iran's drone industry as a response to these attacks, and just got me wondering what is the deal with Iran's drone industry? I mean, it seems to me that there's a lot of countries buying Iran's drones. I mean, what is the comparative advantage that Iran offers with its drones, and how big a business has this really been for Iran?
It's really a fascinating story, because I think we've all kind of naturalized the fact that Iran does drones, and all of Iran's clients have drones. The Houthis have drones. Hezbollah probably has them. They sell them to Russia, astonishingly, right? And if you dig into it, it's a very interesting history, a very deliberate choice on the part of the Iranians, beginning in the Iran-Iraq war. In the late 80s, they realized basically that they were at a structural disadvantage in the more high-end weapon systems. They weren't able to replace the Air Force the Shah had bought. The American Navy sank what there was of the Iranian Navy in the Gulf, the oil platform encounters. And so from 86 onwards, it's amazing. You can go look back. There's these the Iranian popular mechanics magazines celebrating their first experiments with drones since 86.
Are you saying Iran invented the drone?
Yes.
You're telling me Iran... Okay, go on.
Iranian vintage... It's going to be on Chartbook this coming week because the images are so amazing. There was, in fact, a popular Iranian film promoted by the propaganda ministry about an Iranian drone squad operating in the Iran-Iraq war, And they have systematically developed drone capacity since the late 80s, pushing to mass production, also benefiting from the occasional incident when the Americans lost a high-tech drone over Iran. It happened 2 times, and the Iranians immediately reverse engineered them and produced their own knockoff versions of the American ones. The cheap one that's like an old, German V1 bomb with a little moped engine on it is extraordinary because it has a range of almost 1,500 kilometers. So that thing will go. It's easy as anything to shoot down because it's so slow, and it's loud, but it will go very long distances, much longer than some of the more sophisticated versions that the West produces and sells, and they're really, really cheap. So they're $20,000, something like that. Whereas Turkey, which is also a kind of middle-income drone supplier, its cheapest models come in at about almost the $1 million mark, and from the West, they're like way more expensive. So Iran really has cornered this low-end, reliable, quite heavily mass-produced. We did a Tajik episode, right? And they built a drone factory for the Tajiks because the Tajiks were competing, with the Uzbeks, I think, and the Turks had supplied the Uzbeks with drones. So no, it's emerged. You wouldn't say there was a natural comparative advantage, maybe, but they've built, I think maybe the industrial economics term would be they built a drone cluster, right? So they have, in that Krugmanian industrial policy sense, doubled down, made the investments, developed the expertise. They have 2 companies. One is directly linked to the Revolutionary Guards, and the other one is more private. They compete with each other. They use a lot of proxies to source mainly German technology, so that there's a bunch of people who've been arrested at various stages shopping for German kit to go into these drones, and then they reverse engineer it. And the thing about Iran is that we underestimate, right? This is a highly sophisticated, very diverse economy, which is crushed by sanctions, but has huge human resources, huge human capital. And so therefore can work its way around practically any sanctions regime and can do the reverse engineering. So it's not surprising they can do this per se, but it does just seem that they've developed one of the widest palettes. You can go shopping for Iranian drones, and there's like 20 different types online. It's fascinating.
$20,000. We could have raised money. We could have.
Yeah, no, we
gotten
can
one
have
for
our
the
own
podcast.
drone.
I wish.
No, absolutely. We could have a militarized buzz bomb.
It might be too late now with the
Foreign
sanctions.
policy.
But maybe we'll put out a call for fundraising. But I want to shift now to Biden, the first of those names I mentioned at the start, to sort of enter this discussion from a sort of oblique angle. I mean, you yourself have been described as a Keynesian, as an adherent to the thinking of the British economist John Maynard Keynes. I'm not sure you've ever put it in quite those terms, but it's out there, and I don't think you've ever denied it either. So we'll go with that as a description, and it's definitely consistent with the way you.
No, stop apologizing. Right? It's true.
No. Okay, there we go. Exactly. We've known each other for years, but I've never asked you. Are you a Keynesian?
Totally paid up. Fully paid up. I have a little bust, a little statue of him in my office, but along with some other people. But I also have one of Keynes.
So I did want to ask you then, from a Keynesian perspective, again, the Keynesian argument would often be in times of crisis you need public spending. I'm curious, what is the appropriate response to the condition of the U.S. economy right now? I mean, we are, as you said, the economy is very strong. We're near full employment. Growth is pretty good. At the same time, interest rates are, higher than they used to be. Plenty of Americans would love for them to be lower. And yet inflation is still higher than the 2% target. And all these things together, I mean, is this a situation where Keynes, if you were to channel him, would say America really should be pursuing some kind of austerity? I mean, is it time to kind of turn to reductions in public spending? Is that where Keynes would come down, and what would you say about that?
I'm super tempted to go off on a huge Keynes tangent, but we're not going to do that because we're going to promise ourselves to do a Keynes segment.
Okay,
great. It's a great idea. In fact, we should do more segments on economists. It'd be a fun thing to do. Like we could do a whole series, Keynes, Schumpeter, the whole works. I don't think there's any doubt. In a funny kind of way, if you look at his commentary on fiscal policy on a day-by-day basis, especially around World War II. he is disappointingly hawkish and conservative in the day-to-day. So I don't think there's any doubt at all that looking at America's situation with close to full employment and a deficit which could somewhere between 7 and 8% of GDP, he'd be horrified. And it is, in America's history, unprecedented. I mean, we were building up to it with a Republican tax cut of 2017, which generated some pretty large deficits even before COVID struck. But the current situation, the snapshot of the current moment, plus the forecast going forward, takes us into territory we've never ever been in before. Now, I'm not famous as a fiscal hawk, and I'm not calling this a panic station situation. America, it has exorbitant privilege. It's not going to cause an immediate meltdown in the Treasury market. There might be a meltdown in the Treasury market, but it wouldn't be on account of the overall volume of issuance. There's just a bunch of technical issues in the Treasury market which make it very unstable, which need fixing in light of the volume that's coming. But it is an extraordinary situation, and we know for a fact that, I would argue on political grounds for consolidation, because is somebody going to use the large deficits of this period and the debt accumulated somewhere down the line when we would like to run a deficit to argue against the deficit we should properly be running then? Of course they are, right? So we should get some dry powder here and actually show some responsibility. That doesn't, I mean, I can't believe I'm saying this because you end up sounding like Larry Summers and Robert Rubin and the Obama people and the Clinton people. And one of the political lessons we learned from those administrations as left Democrats or just plain Democrats was, let's not play the game where the Republicans run the deficits and the Democrats tidy up after them, right? This is a crazy model. And I'm broadly speaking with the Dems who say, let's just, if they're not willing to play ball, why should we play ball, right? The question then is, okay, if you did want to consolidate, though, how would you go about doing it? And I think the crucial thing, first of all, surely to say is, America is not a society over-provided with excessive public spending and excessive provision of public goods. That is not America's problem. It has a lot of problems, but that's not one, right? And that doesn't mean to say you couldn't trim here or there, or you might consider this budget, say the Pentagon's budget, excessive, but nevertheless, we, broadly speaking, must surely advocate for more spending. We now know that it takes $100 billion a year to halve child poverty in the United States. We know that for a fact. It costs 100, some say 85, some say 110. But if you give that child allowance, you halve child poverty in the United States. The Congress decided not to do that anymore, right? We can't be in that game. We should be saying, here are the building blocks of a better society, and they might be $500 billion worth. We should be in favor of that. So then how do you close this deficit? The only way to go is to raise taxation, for crying out loud. But as soon as you say that, say you wanted to get from 7% of GDP to 2% of GDP, which will be a more reasonable level to be running the deficit at full employment, that's a 5% shift in GDP on the tax side now. And as soon as you say it, everyone in this town just shuts up shop. That is so not happening ever on anyone's watch.
Because that could not only be raising taxes on the super wealthy.
You would have to hit everyone,
yeah,
right? And you would have to move to a system much more like a European tax system. You know, one of the extraordinary things about American society is it's obviously profoundly unequal, and the fiscal side doesn't do enough to close that gap. But what the fiscal side does do in the United States is oddly more progressive than in many European societies, notably Germany, because the tax system in Germany bites all the way down the income scale, both through income tax, social insurance contributions, and through indirect tax through VAT. And the American tax system basically removes any kind of income tax from a huge slice of the bottom end of the income distribution. And given the inequality in the United States and the cost of living and everything else, it kind of has to. But one of the effects of that is to create a system which allows anti-tax agitation amongst the very vocal elite, easy meat, red meat, to mobilize around, because the system is genuinely more progressive than your average European one, because it bites very heavily at the top end. And that is the impasse we need to get out of. We need to build a system that can raise more at the top and somewhat more at the bottom, but in a way, obviously, which doesn't curl people into poverty. So the question is, how would you design that? What would the trade-offs be? It's an enormous problem, not just of politics, but at this point of state building. Like, America has a whole bunch of domestic state institutions which just don't work. Like public transport, Amtrak is one of those, clearly. America does not have a functioning national unemployment insurance system. It has to string it together whenever there's a bad crisis. And God help you if you're in Florida, because it's explicitly designed, the Florida unemployment insurance system, to deter applicants. In so many words, it says so in big, bright letters on the system, right? So when a big unemployment system shock strikes, America has to do these big stimuluses, in part because there is no safety net. And one of the other things the American state, increasingly, we've done an episode about it, increasingly is attriting is the fiscal capacity, in other words, the tax-raising capacity, which is now, believe it or not, at kind of upper middle income level in terms of the share of GDP that the American state machine is able to suck out. As the economy grows, the IRS and the tax system in the United States does not generate the revenue flow you'd expect. So it's not just a problem of money and the politics, it's also a question of actually rebuilding state capacity, which will be a reason to do it if you're coming from the progressive side, but also makes clear just how big a problem this is.
Okay, so Biden should run on the platform higher taxes for everyone.
Higher taxes for everyone with a big, intrusive government apparatus.
Yeah, that's right.
We should
I want to get you on the record.
Indeed,
this is your political advice.
It's as somebody famously said, it's the price we pay for civilization.
Yeah.
It's the price we pay for civilization, and it should be a source of shame, guilt, and concern if you're an affluent American that you don't pay more. Because what that basically means is there's something missing somewhere on the side of somebody who needs it far more than you do, that extra dollar. And there's a you know, and there are these respectable billionaires like Buffett who are part of coalitions which are explicitly volunteering to be taxed more. And when you're in that situation, like, it's truly topsy-turvy world, right? You know, they should be at least protesting against the tax that we exact from them, but they're not. They're actually asking to be taxed more.
So the latest policy that, or the latest policy initiative that the Biden administration has unveiled concerns the U.S.-China relationship, and specifically a new sort of turn in rhetoric towards China, namely an accusation that China is pursuing overcapacity in its manufacturing of climate-friendly technologies. And I was hoping you could help me better understand this accusation, because, you know, the basic facts, I guess, aren't really in dispute. I mean, China has industrial policy. It's, you know, supporting its clean energy industries. I can see why that could be bad for American competing industries. But yeah, I wanted to ask what you think this means for climate change and the politics involved with climate change. Because on the one hand, all this extra capacity seems to me like it would be lowering prices for clean tech. On the other hand, I guess I could imagine this is disrupting the politics over the energy transition in the West. You know, it's preventing maybe the growth of, you know, domestic industries, and that's been the kind of argument for the energy transition in the West. So, you know, which way does this cut? Is China's manufacturing strategy making the energy transition easier, or is it making it harder for the rest of the world?
Yeah, so this really is the hot button issue right now, and you know, it's very interesting to watch the twists and turns of the Biden administration's China position. You know, there was the small yard high fence move, and now we're in the excess capacity position. There's no doubt there's some great work that just came out of the Kiel Institute in Germany that has actually quantified the scale of industrial policy spending. And by their estimate, Chinese industrial policy spending is 1.7% of GDP, which is 4 times larger than industrial policy spending anywhere else in the West. Everyone else does it, but to the scale of about 0.4% of GDP. And one way of kind of rationalizing the overcapacity kind of critique, I mean, it's difficult to go to a straight, naive fairness argument, because everyone does industrial policy. I think the best way to interpret it is, hey guys, stop trying so hard, we can't keep up. Wouldn't it be better if we all just agreed to a kind of arms control policy on industrial policy, and we all agreed to, say, spend, I don't know, 0.6% of GDP, which would be 50% more than we currently do, and half what you currently do, and then we'd kind of be in the same space. But the true naive, blue-eyed, oh, these nasty Chinese who rigged the market kind of argument, no one can seriously believe that, because we all in various ways do. 0.4% of America's GDP is a non-trivial amount of money flowing into the American system, and there are big bits of the global market which are clearly rigged in the interest of Western producers. And the Biden administration administration has been very upfront, for instance, with the IRA about favoring domestic production. So I think that's the sort of the space that we're in. 1.6% of GDP, by the way, is like a third of the Pentagon's budget. So we're talking $250 billion, roughly equivalent, if you translated it over this side, which is a big chunk of money flowing into Chinese industry. The problem, really, I think, though, is not just the scale of the Chinese spending, which could make you feel as though maybe they'd become, this great big state-controlled, state enterprise-dominated economy. The really terrifying thing about Chinese industrial policy is they do spend more, and then it unleashes this absolutely gigantic public-private domino effect, and out the end comes one of the most hyper-competitive domestic markets in the world for everything. So we might think that you would create a bunch of sleepy, good-for-nothing, subsidy-milking businesses from this. But the opposite is the case. You get this supercharged, hyper-competitive, excess capacity market. So for photovoltaics or for batteries or for electric vehicles, the consequence is just this utterly cutthroat competition, first in China's market, which is, for many of these things, the biggest in the world by a large margin. And what we then experience as the spillover, what we think of as dumping, are basically the losers in the Chinese market who are looking for markets elsewhere which are easier to sell into. So this huge surge of cars which the Chinese are exporting, they're not the hyper-competitive best models the Chinese are producing, because those are selling in China, and they're selling to their domestic audience first, obviously, because they want to keep their customers sweet. The stuff that is spilling over to us is really the excess. It's a lot of Western producers who are no longer very attractive in China. It's some of the less competitive Chinese firms which are looking for markets elsewhere. And so that's, I think, the really terrifying thing from a competitive point of view on the Chinese side, is that, yes, they spend more, but we shouldn't imagine that makes them sleepy and uncompetitive, which is, I think, what we would fear here. But on the contrary, it just supercharges this hyper-competitive, really very ferocious market. Is it good for climate change? I mean, in a sense, one can hardly believe we're asking this question. I mean, basically, the Chinese are offering to subsidize to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars everyone else's cheap acquisition of the key elements that we need for electrification, right? I mean, a free gift, right? A free gift of support. And why are we quibbling with it? We're quibbling with it because of the question of employment. And I think that's where the rub comes. A large part of the Biden policy on climate is organized around the idea that you don't talk about climate unless you absolutely have to. What you talk about is green energy and green energy jobs. And what the Chinese do is drive a wedge in there. Because if you're a pure climate person, you take the photovoltaics, you take the cars, you take the batteries, the cheapest you possibly can, you roll them out to the entire world. You don't give a damn where they come from. But that is not the Biden green energy agenda. The Biden green energy agenda is don't talk about the climate. It's not called the Climate Reduction Act or the Carbon Reduction Act. It's called the Inflation Reduction Act, to sell it to Joe Manchin, right? And what the strategy is actually to sell this on the basis of great new jobs. And that's where the Chinese break this. And that does indeed create, if the green energy transition is a bunch of unfamiliar stuff that is being sold by coastal liberals, and you have to buy a marginally more expensive car, and it doesn't come with a sweetener of a bunch of great new jobs, it's a very different thing than if you're selling the Biden version, which is your Ford Lightning made in the United States with sweet American sweat and sweet American things. And it's just the most all-American thing you possibly can have for the moment when the power fails and you have to plug your giant air conditioner into your giant truck. And we sail through the climate crisis in an all-American fashion with nothing having changed, right? That's what they
Is
they
this
would
entirely
love to
fair?
sell.
I mean, can you separate the climate question from this political question? I mean, I don't know. Is there anywhere in the world it's just making the pure climate argument?
So the Brazilians, for instance, are really interesting. They've basically said, look, we're taking photovoltaic from wherever we can get it at the cheapest possible price, and we're going to be sticky about wind. And wind, we're kind of going to try and attract Western producers or Chinese producers to produce in Brazil. And we're going to develop expertise. They have offshore oil expertise. They want to double down on that. Petrobras is kind of in this game. They're also trying to force the Chinese to produce electric vehicles locally in Brazil. So they're trying to revive the what was once a very large Ford, VW were all in Brazil. They want that back with the EV, but they've made a selective choice technology by technology. Photovoltaics, the game is lost. Just buy the cheapest things you possibly can from the Chinese. The strategic argument just doesn't work with photovoltaics because if you buy enough of them, you install them. It's not like the Chinese can somehow turn them off. And they also really don't appear to have Chinese spyware in the photovoltaics. Like even the Chinese apparently aren't interested in monitoring how much power we take or how often the sun shines. That doesn't appear to be a priority. Like maybe there are spice bugs in the cars, but not in the photovoltaics. So we can buy the cheap photovoltaics. The issue there is slave labor, Xinjiang. And it's
small issue, slave labor.
But the question is, how big is it? Yeah. That actually is the question. That genuinely is the question. How much of it is contaminated, quote unquote, slave labor? And that's an open question, and it's a question that, or it's not when I say open, I'm sure there are people who actually know the answer to this, and I just don't happen to know right now. But there are also ways in which we can hope to or try to control the supply stage. And that's, I think, a way of dealing with this, to say there are certain games which are lost. And after all, the big jobs with photovoltaics are in the installation. Why should we want to have people employed in factories making these basically commodity, down-market, cheap things, whereas the skilled jobs are in fitting them into every single individual house that's slightly different than the next one, and that's where all the skill and the jobs could be.
Because factories are so nostalgic and American, as you said, I guess.
Yeah, they love them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, really
but anyway, now to shift to Trump. Obviously, economics is not always necessarily the first thing that comes to mind when we mention Trump, but...
Really? Not business? Surely,
well,
come now. He's a billionaire.
Yeah, no, that's
He's a man of money.
But I guess I wanted to start first by asking, Trump seems to be making inflation a centerpiece of his campaign, namely attacking Biden for the problem that inflation allegedly has been in the United States. But, is there any scenario in which Trump's own plans don't themselves result in higher inflation? I mean, I've tried to understand those plans as best I can, to the extent I can tell that he has any clear policies. They involve a big emphasis on tariffs on one hand, and on the other hand on tax cuts. So, that combination, is there any way that, more Trump doesn't result in more inflation?
Yeah, he likes tariffs, he likes tax cuts, he likes low interest rates, and he wants to stop immigration. And you add those things up, and they're a recipe for supply side and demand side shocks to the economy. His a particular favorite is that he likes protectionism, and he likes a weak dollar. Right? He likes a weak dollar because it makes America more competitive. But if you slap tariffs on foreign goods, it almost invariably leads to a revaluation of your currency the other way. In other words, the currency goes up. That, to a considerable effect, offsets competitive advantages that you gain from the tariff, right? Because it gives more Americans more purchasing power, which makes it cheaper for them to buy foreign goods. And that, in a kind of liberal view of the world, is a satisfying effect. So tariffs are sort of self-defeating because the macro adjustment is large enough to offset. Trump will just be driven crazy by it. I get my sweet new tariff, and then, God damn it, the dollar goes up. I would not want to be trying to help him think through macroeconomic interconnection. Yeah. I think it may be more like a day-by-day
If he offered
thing.
you a job.
It's a day-by-day thing where you just rely on the fact that he's forgetful, and it's like, hey, Mr. President, great news, like we did the tariff, And so, I mean, I think it's and I don't, there's a lot of talk about what his team might be, and I think, there's not a lot of optimism on that front, that there's going to be more coherence. I mean, there's very determined, very, very serious heavy hitters like Lighthizer who are in the frame, and he's not to be messed with. But he is not somebody who's prioritizing macroeconomic balance. This is a flat-out trade hawk, industrial policy, America first, protectionist. I mean, the guy's been fighting America's trade war since Japan in the 80s. Like, it's not a recipe for disinflation. So there is a fundamental contradiction here. I mean, yeah sure.
I mean, you're telling us that Donald Trump Jr. is going to be running the Federal Reserve, I think is what you're telling us.
No, there's another list, and they all start with the name Kevin, apparently. The major qualifying thing is the Kevins. Yeah, there's a list of Kevins who are...
any Kevins out there who are listening want to get on that list.
The other thing we know about Trump and Fed president chairs is that they have to be tall and manly, right? Because he took one look at Janet Yellen and said, no, you can't be Fed chair anymore.
No, yeah.
Small Jewish lady, like, that's just not going to cut the ice. No, we need a a fine
Central
figure of a man like Jay Powell, who's and then Powell could maybe hack it, but of course he can't. They need a new one.
Okay.
They'll need a new one in due course.
Yeah, I mean, despite all of this, despite all of what you're describing, the incoherence, the contradictions, etc., it seems like Trump has plenty of support among, first of all, many of America's most wealthy people. Also, many of the people we might think of as the leaders of our system of capitalism. I mean, people in financial industries. Jamie Dimon, the CEO of J.P. Morgan, recently said that Trump got a lot right as president, in contrast with Biden.
Okay. I've never heard anyone's. Dimon is flat out vocally anti-Trump at this point.
Well, okay.
I mean, he does this balancing out, but behind closed doors in private, it's extraordinary how far. I've watched J.P. Morgan's incoming senior management quake at how far out on the limb he's willing to go. Okay. It's an interesting case, actually. So, I think he's
well, I mean, this might get kind of at my point then, which is, this could be interpreted, I guess, on one hand, simply as a expression of self-interest, right? I mean, Trump could mean lower taxes, and maybe that's what is attracting the support of these types of people. But the likelihood of just systemic instability to me seems pretty high with Trump. I mean, in terms of foreign relations, in terms of international economics, a lot could happen. I mean, so should we be expecting capitalists to have these kinds of questions in mind when they're voting? The kind of systemic stability, it seems like Trump could be a threat. So shouldn't they be keeping that in mind when they're considering who to support?
It's a really fascinating question. I think there's what takes people in a short runway towards Trump, apart from, they may line up in the culture wars on, whatever side he's in, or they may be dispositionally, conservative, and then they have to sort of, shut their eyes and vote for Trump because they're culturally conservative. But I think it's taxes and it's gutting the regulatory state. And American business, regrettably, but undeniably, has a sustained and serious commitment to the pursuit of undoing the development of the administrative state in the United States for the last 50 years, despite the obvious counter, which is how the hell do you expect good governance to function and this society to hold together unless we have these basic provisions in place? And yet there's a sort of it's on issue after issue after issue after issue, they would choose to have a weaker apparatus than a stronger one. And I think that's undeniable, and it cuts across all sectors and almost all interests. It's remarkable. Very few people are willing to make the play on the race to the top in terms of regulatory standards, which is a more European vision, that they will genuinely buy into a race to the top in many cases. And despite the excellence, this is no knock. Like Exxon is a remarkable business organization. There's nothing that the British and the European oil companies have on Exxon in terms of operational or health and safety. Often the contrary, but Exxon will opt for a deregulatory anti-climate strategy any chance is given. Right. So that those two elements are there. The other thing is that depending on where you're located, these corporations, of course, absolutely reflect the divisions within American society. And even if you're running a New York-based bank, a large part of your trading team will be Long Island Republicans and will be cheering for Trump, despite the liberal position taken by the, uptown Park Avenue liberal, corporate C-suite people. So if you're running a big organization, unlike a hedge fund or something like that, where you can just decide which way you're going to swing and do your own thing, or you're in California where, you've just got blanket support within the tech sector, it's overwhelmingly Democrat. But if you're running a big bank, I did a gig for a big company that's located out in New Jersey, and they literally had to say to me, Adam, we're worried you're coming from Manhattan. You do understand that we're very conservative here. Don't come with your fancy liberal. No, I won't say anything more detailed. Okay. But don't come with any of your fancy liberal talk. We're in New Jersey, and in New Jersey, we're finance, and we do finance in a conservative way here.
Yeah.
So So this kind of assumption that we have, speaking as liberals, about where intelligence and power and organization ought to lie is clearly not reflected in natural American society. Otherwise, things will be going a different way, right? So at one level, why are we even asking ourselves this question? I think the answer, though, I'm just coming back to you now, I'm just playing devil's advocate there for a while, is that the Republican Party, around the disintegration of the Bush presidency in 7-8, basically forsook being a party of government, first and foremost, essentially organized around the interests of big capital. This was a conclusion I came to in wrapping Crashed, which was supposed to be a history of 2008 and became a history of a 10-year crisis, which culminated in the election of Trump. And the conclusion I drew from that was, we're writing here the obituary of the Republican Party as a party of power in the sense of the articulation at a general level and through a democratic coalition of the interests of big business in the United States, which forever it was. And it ceased being that. Once you appoint Sarah Palin as your running mate, as John McCain did, game over, right? And they weren't even, the congressional Republicans were not willing to cooperate with the Bush presidency in doing TARP, for crying out loud. What they're doing is bailing out American big business, and you can't get them a Republican majority. They relied, perversely, on the Democrats to give them the majority. And that, we've never come back from that. And it's structurally the case. In the 2016 election, corporate America was incensed because neither of the two candidates was running on a free trade platform. And large parts of corporate America could not be found to sponsor the Republican convention because they didn't know whether Confederate flags weren't going to appear and God knows what else alongside their corporate logos. So this sense of a kind of organic bond is really, I think, has been fundamentally challenged. And so you're left with this negative agenda. Like if we can't really vote for the Democrats because they are essentially a politics of regulation and tax. And so we swing the other way, even though de facto this means that America would not, for instance, have a progressive green energy agenda, which large parts of American business, when push came to shove, when Joe Manchin really looked as though he was going to kill IRA, stood up and said, no, look, we're competing with European and Asian competitors who've got major subsidies for green energy. We need them too, right? There's a progressive wing of American capital, which at that point really did realize there ain't no one here but us chickens, right? Somebody has to actually take charge of a process which no longer has a clear logic. And if you listen to, there aren't a whole hell of a lot of globally orientated American business leaders, whether they like the low taxes or the deregulation, who look at Congress right now and say, well, these people know how to run global hegemony. Like, this is all good. Like, we can't see any potential problems with, a confrontation with Russia. This is clearly all we need to do is do some sort of deal. American capital pulled out of Russia quite hard in 2022, and they took very considerable hits for doing so. And now we're supposed to all just sit down with Putin nicely and do some kind of deal. It's your point is absolutely real, and it's not only in the US after all. Look at Brexit Britain. I mean, again, a society where you would have been able to say for 150 years the Tory party is the party of business. And then you have Prime Minister Johnson, who literally says, F you. F you to British business.
You're making me feel bad for big business here. They've been left homeless. They need, who's going to take care of big business?
The deep point here is that we now are waking up to, as liberals and progressives, waking up to how much we actually handed off to the power of liberal big business since the 1990s. And the central question that we handed off to them was peace. The central question we handed off to them was relations with China. Because we didn't need to, on the left side, formulate a policy of peace with China, détente, any of that really, really difficult stuff that killed the left in the old Cold War. We didn't have to do any of that because Steve Schwarzman and Hank Paulson and these people were, Hank Paulson, for 2 Treasury secretaries at least in a row, it was evident it had to be a Goldman Sachs guy. And it had to be a Goldman Sachs guy because they know China.
Yeah.
Now
it's just got to be a Kevin.
Now it's got to be somebody, at least under the Democrats, who's definitely, I mean, look at Jake Sullivan. He comes into office saying, my job is not to represent the interests of Goldman Sachs in relation to China. And that sounds great on the one hand, and then you ask yourself, God, whose interests are you representing? And it turns out it's the American worker, right? But de facto, it opens the door to the Pentagon, to the military-industrial complex, because the peace interest, what Karl Polanyi called the peace interest, as another economist for our list, is no longer in the front, right? Can no longer simply take this issue off the agenda. And so the nightmare is that, you know, lefty progressives actually have to stand up and say these horrendous things like, yes, I think we should engage in peaceful coexistence with China. No one really wants to be caught saying that. But in the current context, it's an important thing to have to say.
So now to shift to Bloomberg. We are, as I said, in the Hopkins Bloomberg Center at SAIS, and you know, I was hoping you could help me understand what kind of investment was involved in making this, the Bloomberg, the Hopkins Bloomberg Center. Well, that's clearly that must be the case. It's a beautiful building. But maybe put another way. You know, in what way is this a? And I'm not meaning this in any slanted way, but in what way is this a good investment? You know, obviously we've talked about philanthropy before on our podcast. You know, and donations to universities, you know, may not fit the metrics of effective altruism. You know, that's a term we've used when we've discussed philanthropy. You know, but does philanthropy of this kind have an ethical, economic logic of its own, and then what would that be?
So I think if you look at this from a sort of utilitarian collective, you know, utility function, philanthropic donation to education is clearly an excellent thing. It's hard to think of anything that would be more worthwhile, really, than building the next generation and the human capital and widening minds. Though, but I think it's also clear, and all the educational economics shows us this, that the sooner and the earlier in a child's life that you invest, ideally, in fact, in utero, in the welfare of the mother during pregnancy, makes a huge difference to subsequent life. So malnutrition, adequate healthcare, and so on. But the earliest stage that you can, and it generates returns which are just crazy. Like, there really isn't a better way of spending a dollar, because you get somewhere between lowest estimates $5, $6, highest estimates $12, $13, $14 back in all sorts of different ways. And basically, I think that logic holds all the way down the chain. So the earlier you invest, the best returns that you get in general. I've always been a huge fan of the argument that what really needs building in American society, if you look at that Raj Chetty team at Stanford and Harvard that did these amazing administrative record-based studies of social mobility in the United States, mobility between the bottom quintile and the top quintile, another thing we should do an episode about. Amazing data, amazing.
I'm not remembering any of it.
And if you look at the champions of social mobility in the United States, there are some places which are downright bad. Right? In the Ivy League, there are some places which actually regress social mobility, increase the probability of the top 20% staying there, and so on. Like but there are champions, and they're the state colleges. So SUNY, CUNY in my part of the world are just epic social mobility providers for the recent migrant population. But I think even more potent, generally considered to be, are the community college systems, which provide really extraordinary service to working class and lower middle class Americans and bridge that gap, which is crucial in American society. We know it from Angus Deaton and all of that work on the deaths of despair and the Great Divide in American society. The huge divide is between those with nothing more than high school leaving certificate and everyone above in the graduate population. And it's a matter of life and death, right? The people with nothing more than high school are disproportionately mentally ill, incarcerated, and their life expectancy, especially for men, is collapsing in the United States. So shifting people out of that group into folks at some sort of degree status is crucial. And they are, generally speaking, underfunded. And I've always wondered, do they have endowments that you could donate to? Because when I do these business talks, people always ask me, what should I? And I want to say, you know, endow your local community college. And it turns out there are data on this, and it's exactly what you'd expect, which is that the average college across all of the colleges in the United States has a 10 times larger endowment than your average community college across the United States. And these are averages, so they're not medians and means, but you know, it gives you an idea. I would, if I was in major philanthropy, be systematically looking to upscale the endowment and provide financial stability and scholarships across that entire tier. I think it's crucial. It would be a transformative. I think also it would have a political signal. It would say that all of the big money doesn't just go to the fancy places. It's going to actually go to a place that will embrace the entire community that you're in. I think it would be a profoundly positive signal. If you are going to give money to a really posh school, I have to say, having spent my whole life in really posh schools, I would have loved to have been at a really posh school with a place like this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's flipping gorgeous, right? And the beauty of it is it was clearly not built for a university. No one builds places this nice. Well, maybe Princeton, but it's extraordinary. You walk in and you just feel I'm in some palace. And that's an incredibly good feeling to have in a university. And I have to say, if it's going to be in any university anywhere in the United States, I'm very glad that it's here. Because those horrible people often in Congress who have such a despicable attitude towards higher education should be shamed. And I like them to crawl in here on their hands and knees. Bow down. Bow down. Bow down before the power and money that's concentrated here. If you can't understand this lesson any other flipping way, let's just impress the hell out of you. Because this is not Mar-a-Lago. This is nicer than Mar-a-Lago, for crying out loud. Right? This is an elegant public forum. And somebody, very rich, and thank God for that, is making a statement about what higher education means in this society and should mean. Right? And it is disastrous the way in which the attitude towards higher education has become polarized in the United States. There are a considerable number of Republicans who are explicitly phobic towards higher education in the US. And that's in part because they think we're a bunch of liberal, they have a conspiracy theory which is not entirely off beam about the way in which liberal politics functions in higher education. But it really will help to have a place like this here with some of the agendas also that this place is going to promote. We were hearing from the Dean, right? We were hearing about science. And God help us, we need that represented in the most powerful possible way in the politics of this country. And we were hearing about China and a serious conversation about China. And not just some hawkish backlash politics, but a politics that actually respects China as a great world civilization with which we must engage, and to which universities like this and mine, I hope, remain committed to that kind of engagement with our counterparts on the other side. And I'm to that extent, no amount of money. I bring it on, make it even fancier. Like really make a temple to what university education means and put it up against Congress and says, here is the power, here is the money. Here is what really matters. Shame on you if you talk the way you do about higher education. Shame on you. Who the hell are you? Like, seriously, the House of Representatives people are a disgrace to this society, in large part. I speak, obviously, you know what happened to the head of my university yesterday, and it's put me in an angry mood.
Yeah, no, I've only seen you get so worked up about Brexit. That's the only other subject I've seen you get so worked up about. But I think you're also forgetting that Trump endowed his own university. I don't know anyone
absolutely.
who graduated from Trump University.
The guy can see a business opportunity when credit to him. It's not a bad idea.
Yeah, sure. I don't know. Maybe Mar-a-Lago will be a campus one day. We don't know.
It could be like the Getty Center. It could be like the Getty Center.
It might be.
Yeah, he's got great taste in marble.
Let's be optimistic.
He's genuinely into fancy interior decorating.
Exactly.
Just it could be like this,
Yeah, SAIS Mar-a-Lago.
Guilt studying,
Can that be? Maybe we'll see. But I guess just to briefly stay on this philanthropy topic. Who then does who comes to mind as a kind of historically as a model philanthropist, or is philanthropy itself a kind of symptom of something something of a problematic system somehow?
No, it clearly is. God help, they should all be wealth taxed. Let's be clear. Why is there not an agreement that every year we reduce a billionaire to a 500 millionaire?
Just one.
And just one every year. And they're just politely asked to donate everything above 500 million, which after all does afford a very pleasant lifestyle. They should televise the lottery every year as well. Absolutely. They should be
pick
queuing
a name
up,
out of the bowl.
And then we put their name on the national fund, like the National Lottery in the UK that paid for the Olympics and stuff like that. It should just be a kind of anti-lottery for billionaires. And we leave them with a very, very comfortable, rewarding existence that provides incentives in every conceivable way for every possible form of effort. 500 million for crying out loud. And the rest gets taxed away. But since that's not happening, if you're in the business of trying to get super rich Europeans to give money to anything public, you'll know what an advantage it is to have an American giving culture. It truly is, because you cannot. It's so difficult in the European studies field that I run an institute at Columbia. There's plenty of huge, obscene wealth in Europe, and it doesn't feel the need to legitimate itself. It doesn't feel the desire to put its name on buildings. You know, I came up through the Oxbridge system, which you'd think would be the ultimate old school system. The colleges, in many cases, have the names of donors on them. But when I was coming through that system, we had no culture of giving. No culture at all. There was no sense, because it was essentially a publicly provided elitist system, and we didn't feel grateful for it. We were entitled to it. And I have to say that the American system, which actually binds an elite into a sense of mutual obligation, and in the top schools, though it should be advertised far more proactively, basically means that lower income kids go for free, as they should, and they're cross-subsidized out of other people's fee paying, doesn't exist to the same extent in Europe. And it would be, if you look at the social mobility numbers, their supposedly more egalitarian systems don't, on average, produce massively better outcomes, right? So there's huge, you know, Pierre Bourdieu, that kind of French sociology shows you how it shows. The French have an uber elitist higher education system entirely paid for by the public purse. You go to one of the Grande Écoles, you don't pay a cent. Literally not a cent to go to one of the most exclusive forms of higher education in the world. If you're asking me like for a model, I mean, coming from Britain, the obvious case to cite is the Wellcome Trust. Which is GlaxoSmithKline, the big pharmaceutical company, founded by an American re-immigrant, so an American businessman who was doing transatlantic business. And they're the fourth largest private foundation in the world, $28 billion, largely devoted to public health, medical research. It's the big driver of, I think the largest single driver of global public health research. The Gates Foundation does very large-scale work as well. But that's the model that we were talking about when we were talking about the Danish company, essentially of a very large-scale endowment almost 100 years ago that took a very large slice of private capital, placed it in a philanthropic trust, and has then stood back, right? So it's not a highly personalized form. It's an institutionalized form. It's kind of like not a sovereign wealth fund, but a public interest wealth fund that sits on this pot that is devoted to medical research. And if you know anyone in the life sciences or biomedical field in Europe, they quite likely will have cycled through one of the grants that the Wellcome Trust provides. It also sponsors, you know, fabulous work in the history of medicine and the social sciences of medicine. There's all sorts of politics around it, because like the Gates Foundation, it's a huge whale in a relatively small bathtub. So that creates disproportions, and there is critical social science on the impact of the Wellcome Trust on research in the UK, because whatever agenda they set. You remember when we were doing the Danish case, there was this interesting thing where they tried to randomize the selection of grants because they didn't want to be accused of picking winners all the time. And I don't think Wellcome has gone that far. But they would be an instance, and I think that's a viable model, right, where you basically selectively socialize big capital and devote it to a particular specialist niche of research. It's ideal if it's a moderately sized contribution to a gigantic field, so that you don't have undue influence in the particular area that one private or semi-private interest is operating in. But yeah, I would be churlish not to mention that coming from Britain, because it's a hugely beneficial driver of public interest research.
I do like the idea of completely randomized philanthropy, of just someone getting a call and just being funded out of the blue. I would like that. I think that's the way it should all, you know, these grants should just be made even without applying to them. You know, but we should turn to Q&A now. I do hope folks have questions, and you know, any questions at all would be welcome. I should say the other name that we didn't get to was Immanuel Kant, who is not a U.S. politician, but it is his 300th birthday next week, as I'm sure you all know. And we thought we'd talk about the economics of Kant, but we'll do that in a future episode.
We should do that when we do Adam Smith.
Yeah, we have a lot of economists.
Kant was
Keynes, Schumpeter.
One of Kant's students was basically responsible for introducing Adam Smith to the German language world. And from that then come the famous liberal Prussian reformers of the early 1800s. So Kant was an avid reader of Scottish Enlightenment, philosophies of history. Didn't always agree with them, but was quite in the spirit. And he especially liked Adam Smith on the division of labor, because there's a passage in Smith where he says, the division of labor will at some point become so refined and complex that there will be people who devote their entire time to nothing but philosophical speculation. And when they do that, the effect will be an extraordinary increase in the productivity of philosophers.
Have you memorized the work of Kant?
And like
Kant,
Kant really loved this passage. Yeah.
Well, it will be a future episode.
We've got a long list of dudes. So it's great to have a long list of dudes, but if somebody would like to break the long list of dudes, that would also be something that will, no disrespect to dudes, but can't help noticing that that's what it is. Anyway, hi.
Hi, I'm Ben. I'm kind of interested in Cuba's economy, and they have some serious, pretty structural issues, and I've been actually meaning to ask you guys to do an episode segment on this. So if you guys want to just save your answers for that would be great. But
you're really tempted.
Yeah, it's kind of a big question, but I guess what if you could just talk a little bit about some of the issues facing their economy, and maybe putting aside the question, like the political question of America's embargo. What does the path forward kind of look for Cuba, and is there a world in which Cuba kind of gets out of this and it doesn't look like a sort of pre-Castro playground for wealthy Americans?
So I am going to pass on this, and we're going to stack it. And I'm having this thought of like, okay, it's all very well to do, this show in Germany where we have a pretty good idea of what the questions are going to be. Yeah. And we do this in a place like SAIS, and it could be literally about anything, about anywhere.
Yeah. No. You've achieved like the rarest of all options.
This is great, and we are going to pile these topics up. So I really want to do that show because I think lurking in the background of a Cuba question surely has to be a broader, what the hell is America's policy thinking about the entire region, the Caribbean in general? Like, what is the plan here, folks? Because it is potentially, some of you may know that I'm keen on this polycrisis idea. And part of the reason I got interested in that was because I had some experience of life in the Bahamas and the Caribbean, and if you spend any time there, you end up dealing with a lot of Haitian migrants, both formal and informal, documented and undocumented. And so I got super interested in the kind of crisis dynamics of the region. And Cuba is a potential Haiti in the making, looking there. And I think there needs to be a more concerted. I'm not faulting the Biden people. I'm sure there are smart people in the State Department and elsewhere that are breaking their brains over this issue. But it hasn't risen to the surface, right? It was one of the issues that got handed off to Kamala Harris early in the administration, the whole Central American portfolio. And with the scale of the refugee/migrant crisis that America already has on its doors, and its limited capacity politically to cope, not economically and socially. I live in New York, and really, there is no crisis. The city is absorbing a flow of migrants. There is no crisis. These are hardworking people. It's a hardworking city. They're broadly speaking welcome to come and work hard along with everyone else in New York. And the shame is that we can't provide them with better and a more immediate accommodation. But there's no crisis. That's just nonsense. But politically speaking, everyone can turn it into a crisis, right? And that's what all societies have to regulate. And Cuba is potentially a very, very big version of that, right, with a legacy. And what exactly its trajectory would be, one story that caught my eye, and this could be a hook, was there were food riots, right? They had a first wave of food riots. And not being a Cuba specialist, I nevertheless thought, Jesus, right, that jogged me into greater consciousness. So thank you for bringing that. Let's put that on the docket. Should we go this side, that side, this side? Yeah.
Thank you both. I wanted to return to the topic of U.S.-China relations. So I think it was on Wednesday that President Biden announced potential increased tariffs on China for aluminum, steel. So I wanted to see what you made of that, both politically and economically, what the consequences might be.
Yeah, I think there's electioneering going on here. I expect a steady stream of Democratic announcements on tariffs. That steel labor union is like really swinging for the fences, right? It's an interesting phenomenon, and broadly speaking, one has to be sympathetic to the fact that the Biden administration has given organized labor not just a merely symbolic shake, but actually is quite seriously interesting, I think, in redressing the imbalance. if you have to go hard on China with tariffs, those are the sectors surely to go for. Like, they have undeniable, massive, historic scale excess capacity in steel and aluminium. They make it in a very dirty way. This is the heart of the coal-burning fossil industrial complex that is really burning through the world's climate. It is the legacy of what, from a historian's point of view, is just a sort of staggering thing that you look at in awe, right? I mean, the Chinese doubled global steel output in less than a generation, doubled global steel output. So the entire industrial revolution history of the entire world doubled in 20 years. I mean, it's just, we never, just didn't think that sort of thing was possible, right? But it has huge consequences, and at the margin, a very small amount of their exports is enough to completely capsize everyone else's markets, what's left. And we actually need that sector to be a lead elephant in the hard-to-abate green energy transition. And it doesn't help if they're just being killed by Chinese imports. So if you have to go somewhere, I would be tempted to go there. I thought the Biden administration's efforts to corral the Europeans into some sort of deal on this were never going to work because the Europeans don't like that kind of deal. So this is maybe an acceptable second best. I don't think the argument for this extends to some of the other things they would also like to sanction, and Trump will go a whole nother way. Maybe back over here.
Hey, Dean, first of all, thank you so much for coming. I'm a former student of yours and a huge fan of the books, the podcasts, everything. So when I heard you were coming to DC, I was really grateful. My one question, you invoked one of many questions, but you invoked Keynes earlier, and it got me thinking we're rapidly coming up on the 100-year mark of Keynes's economic possibilities for our grandchildren, where he predicted, I think by 2031, was that, we'll be working 15 hours a week because, look, we're going to have this massive GDP. And, the aggregate predictions that he made aren't that far off, but the distribution is. So I'm wondering, I think about this a lot in the context of AI. I think that's sort of where people's mind goes when they're thinking about rethinking work. I'm wondering what the role you think of the government is in terms of AI industrial policy and helping us get to those possibilities that Keynes envisioned. And if we're betting on Kevin's for Trump's Fed, I bet Kevin O'Leary. I think he's like precisely Trump's type of man.
Are you not working 15 hours a week? I'm at 15. I don't know.
I mean, this essay is great. So that's a question for our Keynes. We're having our script just written for us.
Yeah, it's all here.
Economic possibilities for my grandchildren is a fabulous essay. It's not it's our, isn't it? Sadly, he didn't have children. Sorry. A fact that was once viciously exploited against him by a colleague of mine, and in fact is the result of fertility problems that he had with his wife, and they weren't able to have children. It was a source of great regret. So if you've ever read anywhere that the fact that Keynes didn't have children contributed to his feckless attitude on debt, put it down to homophobic slander. But there's this extraordinary essay in which he describes, in the middle of the Depression, basically, folks, it's not going to be so bad because economic growth is real. And as much as I'm a theorist of the short run and of shocks and of recessions, we need to raise our view to the horizon. But yes, he was in the end, a super elitist Bloomsbury intellectual who, though he worked frantically hard his whole life, thought, I think, of his own work as separate and different from the work of ordinary people. And therefore, I think, had the idea that, broadly speaking, as we achieved the basics of a modern life, that people would be allowed to crank back. And in Europe, after all, that's exactly what has happened. If you look at, over time, the labor input for a rich society like Germany, which still likes to fancy itself, it's one of its many out of touch with reality, counterfactual imaginings, is one that the Germans work particularly hard. And if you've spent any time in Germany, you know it's clearly not true, not even remotely. And this is, broadly speaking, to be welcomed, that they should just give up their silly old Puritan assumption that it makes them better if they did, because they don't. And actually, collectively, in fact, there's a discussion now, isn't there, of going to a 4-day week for one of the major trade unions there, which would take you in Keynes's direction. Could AI disencumber us of more work? I'm sure it could, particularly the laborious paper shuffling type. In fact, in the bank that was hosting the event that I was at in the last couple of days, there's a lot of talk about all their compliance work in future being done by AI, because that's exactly the kind of thing that should be done by AI, isn't it? Compliance. Who'd want to use real people doing that? So, but you can see that the argument, the question, of course, is always going to be, and you addressed it, is distribution. Like, so how then are we going to ensure that people have a decent livelihood, meaningful social activities outside the home? And that's been always the stumbling block. But 15 hours a week is maybe on the downside. The Europeans are within striking distance of 30 to 35. And that does mean their GDP growth is slower. And it does mean that their societies are, if you're used to the frenetic pace of New York, or just, you know, if you have Chinese friends and you describe to them what their experience of being in Europe is just comical. It's astonishing. You know, if somebody's used to the pace of Shanghai, where they're taking work meetings at 11 p.m. routinely, it's just, you know, Europe is just this weird Disney sleepy world. But it's an incredibly high standard of living, right? And with an adequate welfare state, it can really provide a different model, and it does address a central concern of Keynes's.
It's very pleasant in Germany,
Yeah.
but you still need a fax machine if you want to get things done.
I know this is awkward, but can we do a kind of gender rotation? Can I bring you, because you were the first, I think, to step up, and I do think we should be conscious of this.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I had a question, knowing that you are a professor at Columbia and just the current events happening right now.
No. Adam knew this was coming.
I know this
Thank
is
you
an
so
econ
much.
podcast, but I couldn't resist. I just wanted to know your thoughts on the arrests, including one professor and at least 100 students.
Yeah, I gather. I think one of the legal observers was arrested, right?
We should provide some context for people maybe
Those
not
who have
following
not been
this
following
news.
Twitter this afternoon, yes, there was an encampment of students protesting Columbia's endowment, essentially investment in Israeli assets, and wanting the university to take somebody may correct me on this rendition, a more vocal position with regard to demanding a ceasefire and so on. And they made an encampment that was in no way discussed with the university administration or with any of their potential supporters. The president of the university, after a particularly unpleasant grilling on Capitol Hill day before yesterday, came home to New York and asked the NYPD to clear the camp, and they did that this afternoon, I gather, actually as we were gathering here. And I asked a friend whether there was anyone there who would be able to give us a halfway neutral and objective description of what was going on, and that person assured me, yes, there were legal observers on hand, and I gather some of them have been arrested too, which is what, broadly speaking, you'd expect from the NYPD dealing with I'm sorry to say that, but it's certainly what doesn't surprise me. Maybe I'm wrong to have that expectation about NYPD, but it doesn't surprise me. And from my position, it's a risk that the university administration took when they invited them onto our campus. I gathered the student response the last time I looked was to form an even bigger cordon of students around the place where there's others were arrested in, and that's the last I know. It's very, very upsetting. If you ask me how it feels to teach there, it's extraordinarily upsetting situation. Do I want to elaborate on that? It's extraordinarily upsetting because events outside the campus, obviously outside all of our lives, and after all, the situation we're in is profoundly upsetting, surely, to all of us. And we've been talking about it on the pod. We talked about it when we were in Berlin. One of the kind of absurdities is that our collective anguish about the situation gets focused in places like American super elite, incredibly safe campuses, where I understand some people feel scared, and I'm not going to deny their emotions. And other people feel anguished and scared more generally by the powers that are inflicting such huge damage on their families, have inflicted in the past, on October 7th, and then subsequently day after day after day. But of course, we are all actually remote from the horror that's happening on the ground. And nevertheless, we live out on campuses, and that, after all, is also part of the role of a campus and a university is to expand us imaginatively. So I'm not saying, this isn't a banal critique to say these people shouldn't get so excited about it because it's not happening to them. We are here because we are people of the mind, and people in the mind can travel, and so we have passionate identifications with various different sides. I think this is all entirely appropriate. But it really is, and it has been an anguish, and it is, I think, for everyone involved in this. There may be some people who just get some self-righteous kicks out of it, but I think they're a small minority. I think most people are just very upset, whichever side they belong to. I won't deny the fact that I think it's extraordinarily regrettable that NYPD has a probably regular presence on our campus. It didn't used to. We have our own police force. Wasn't ever necessary. And from my own vantage point, and I'm not Jewish and I don't wear a kippah, so I don't know what it's like to be in that position, but I find it incredibly difficult to actually believe that the threat that people who are in that position experience warrants the level of repression that's now being doled out. But that is, as I say, from the position that I speak from. And I can't do any better than that. And I'm not willing to simply dismiss those fears, but I just don't think, from what I've experienced on campus, and I teach classes with many Orthodox Jews in them. I've been teaching a class on the Holocaust, on the history of war in Germany with Orthodox Jews, with Arab students in the class. We've talked about genocide, we've talked about the law of war. In my classroom, there has not been any kind of interaction that has been stressful to either side beyond just the horror of what we're talking about. So I find it impossible to believe that we need the NYPD to sort this out. And I resent the fact that that's the decision the administration took, and it's not in my name.
Hi, my name is Adi. I'm from Kazakhstan, and just wanted to ask about, digging deeper on that topic. I wanted to ask, how do you think the sort of two contradictions that I am to describe will resolve itself? Because, so the first one being that, again, I think after the events of the 7th of October, I think you have supported the letter that was circulated in Colombia. And, after that, there was a backlash, and then, there was a huge sort of divergence between non-STEM and STEM faculty members at Columbia and in general universities about how they view the events in the Middle East. And I think this sort of divergence is culminating into, the NYPD arresting students and faculty members in general. So I want to ask, how do you think this sort of divergence and contradiction between the academia members and students will resolve itself in the future? And the second contradiction being that the way sort of Germany has responded to the criticism towards its foreign policy and economic policy, I guess, is going to resolve itself, because the situation seems to be pretty dire, I think. And I guess you agree as well from what you've been tweeting and writing. So yeah, I guess my question is, how do you think these two almost dialectical contradictions will resolve themselves in the future, if ever?
Those are very fair and important questions, but shall we agree that this will be the last round on this particular vein? I would be much more comfortable with that. If you want to talk about the actual situation in the Middle East, that's great. But I meant what I said a minute ago, I think there's something perverse about the way in which we're acting out what should be our continuous engagement with the disaster unfolding on the ground there in these excessively elaborate and overheated conversations about what are, frankly, first world, ultra-privileged issues. And I really think we need to have a discipline with ourselves in stepping back from that. And so I don't deny the force of this, but your latter, the point about Germany, is exactly in the spirit of where I would want to go. I'm not sure I quite got your characterization, but I would say that both the Columbia student body and the Columbia faculty are divided, have been from the beginning. And it's not surprising that they are. And it's perfectly legitimate that they are. And with very few exceptions, the vast majority of both students and faculty that I have dealings with are perfectly capable of, emotionally capable of, and politically open to maintaining that pluralism of views respectfully and in a dignified way, and not relying on external forces to arbitrate, and not pulling the panic button, and not playing the fear card, and treating each other with the openness and intellectual engagement that this situation demands. And it was in that spirit that I signed that letter. In politics, you have to pick manifestos, and you have to pick movements. Individual action in political situations can often be just pure narcissism. I don't like this platform. It's not quite what I want to say. I can't sign up. I'll start my own platform. No, if you're actually thinking politically, you have to make a choice about where the power lies, where the coalition is, who your allies are, potentially, and so you make compromises and you sign things, right? And then you don't deliver like mea culpas and apologies and qualifications, because that subverts the logic, right? The logic is you sign and then you stand by it and you hand off the responsibility, because not everyone's a leader. I'm a very vocal person. I have loads of platforms. But if somebody in my department is going to speak about Palestinian issues, it's going to be Rashid Khalidi and not me, right? Not me. Why the hell should I speak? Will I be a foot soldier of Rashid's? Absolutely. I'll put my name to anything that Rashid thinks that we should sign. Not because I'm blind, but because of the balance of political judgment tells me this is a man who has every reason to treat this seriously, and he's not an anti-Semite. And anyone who defames him as such is my enemy. And I mean that politically. This is where we get back to Brexit and Schmidt. Enemy in the full sense of the word. Enemy, right? So we can either play this in a way which is mutually respectful, which we should, or we don't. And in that case, the game changes. And when people make that kind of attack against somebody like Rashid, the game changes. And that's their choice. That's not his choice, it's not my choice, but it's their choice. So, but I have not seen, I have to say, this is absolutely radical minority. I've been teaching all year long, seminars, lecture class. It has never been an issue so it's a tiny minority hyped by a media system which is feeding on this in a particular context, which is feeding off this anti-liberal, anti-university sentiment, which wants to haul the presidents of Ivy League colleges before some sort of goddamn House committee in which a bunch of, really, words fail me, call these people to account because they're entitled to do that. And our academic leaders feel that they have to comply with these requests. But it is not representative of what's going on the campus. And the campus has been a thoroughly productive place of work and of education and of learning throughout the whole year. And I'm sure it will go on being so as well. So Germany, to substance. There has been an absolutely astonishing effort in the German public sphere to silence anything but a very bland, moralistic, pro-Zionist position. And the sort of thing that foreign policy regularly publishes. For instance, that Israel is a strategic liability for the United States. Steve Walt's position is unthinkable in the equivalent magazine spectrum in Germany. Very difficult to publish in the same way. Right? So the bandwidth of opinion that is actually totally legitimate in the United States is not so in Germany to the same extent. It's a remarkable act of sort of self-censorship. And it has caused me some deep soul searching, because this position is taken by my generation of, above all, Green Party politicians. Robert Habeck, we both had a big crush on Robert Habeck. We were going to do a feature on Habeck. Like, he's a fascinating guy. Really sophisticated, modern, democratic politician. Very interesting man as well in politics, like a very interesting form of political masculinity. But then when the chips were down, right, and a very difficult choice had to be made, he comes out with this, to my mind, extraordinarily simplistic rendition of how German politics and Germany's increasingly diverse society should respond to what is actually, I think everyone who looks at this fairly, of course, including the overwhelming majority of liberal Jews and liberal Israelis, thinks as an extraordinarily complex problem, which is freighted with the risks of violence and guilt on both sides, he reduces it to a kind of moral platitude in a very narcissistic way. And it was a huge shock for me, because I can't separate myself easily from that politics. So if there is a political party in the world where I feel like truly identified with, it's because of growing up in Germany. And it has huge ramifications in Germany because they have such a large publicly funded cultural scene. And there is a guard dog, on the right wing, which is the Springer Verlag, their version of Murdoch, which is overtly, there's a very good piece by Hans Kunadi in Dissent, which literally has the title Zionism über alles. And this isn't something he made up, but it's the boss of the Springer Verlag who, in a candid email to his colleagues, said, and my final mantra, he's railing on about how he can't stand modern Germany. It's degenerate. It's not like the old West Germany of old. And the one thing that we really have to uphold is the mantra of Zionism über alles. And so if you're in a political system where you have a lot of publicly funded university and cultural institutions, and you have that lurking on the right wing, and you have the legacy of Germany's commitment to Israel, which goes back decades, it creates this very, very narrow space. And I think also, and this is the last point I'll add on this, is that in these actions of censorship, a central issue is not really just Germany censoring itself. Though in fairness, German politicians are well aware, and all of the polling shows that very large minorities of the German, white German, for want of a better word, population expresses great reservations about Israel, and there are substantial fractions, as you would expect in Germany, given its history of low-level, and in some cases not even very low-level anti-Semitism. But the real conversation, the real question that's being asked, and the most explosive part of Habeck's reaction to the crisis, was the demand that the Muslim community of Germany show loyalty to this mantra and this notion of what Germany is. And the struggle, in other words, is not just about, is as much as anything, it's a bigger version of the Colombia problem. This reaction is actually about Germany's self-image and not about the situation on the ground. It's actually about Germany's self-image, in the sense of this is a society which came to terms with the past and owes a debt to Israel and so on, but also a society increasingly riven and torn by its increasingly diverse, massively diverse. It has a higher percentage of non-native born citizens in the United States now. 40 to 50% of kids in Germany's schools in the urban areas have migrant backgrounds. Is struggling to define itself, and in that struggle, the issue of Islam and Arab identities, particularly male Arab identities, and the questions of sexuality and gender that circle around those, which are in some ways a little bit analogous to the fears about race and sex in the United States, are really there, and they're very powerful. And there are cynical players in the system who know this very well and will play on this, and that's what's really worrying about this. Sorry, very long answer.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, but I have the disappointing news that we only have a few minutes left. So
let's take
two. I would say,
and I'll be quick.
Yeah, I would say we take the next two questions. I'm sorry that we can't take all of them, but yeah, please, you and in the next one of the microphone here.
October 7th in Colombia questions. Right?
Yeah, I think that was clear.
I promise this one is not about Israel and Palestine, or about economics, really.
All right.
There's a lot of people in this room
What's left?
who are hopefully about to graduate, if things go according to plan. And I know a lot of your listeners are young professionals, and both of you have been in the game for a little while now. That's a good thing. I'm curious if there's anything that you know now that you wish you would have known at the beginning of your career.
So you made a number of references to your various interactions with sort of political and business elites, and as I understand, were something of the Davos it girl last year. As that's a pretty select company. Well, yeah, maybe
You
I'm
and Robert
misrepresenting.
Habeck.
Please correct me if I'm wrong. But as your philanthropy apologetics aside, as some perhaps like at the left flank of the sorts of people who are allowed to interact with elites at this level, presumably you're either explicitly or implicitly discussing their complicity in what you call the polycrisis or the various pathologies of our world. And I'm curious what their reaction to that is.
So I do indeed see that as my job, and I think it's a humanities job, right? I mean, one of the things that I think the humanities and history in particular bring to bear on our thinking about the world what they bring to bear is an acute consciousness of the reflexivity, right? So that we are Perry Anderson once accused me of being like this liberal thinker in medias res in the middle of things, to which my response is, Perry, where do you think you are? Like, are you not in the middle of something? Like, where do you float? In fact, we are always in the middle of things, and to that extent complicit, and the more powerful you are, and the more reach you have, the more complicit you are, the more agency you have. And so, yes, I do have a lot of conversations with people which are about plumbing questions of agency and responsibility. And I spend quite a lot of time doing hey, we all know that inequality is a problem. And you all do know, don't you, that the very sheer success of your enterprise makes that problem worse and cannot but. And it is your job, I think, in that setting to repeatedly drive that point home. I never make any bones about the fact that being a highly paid employee of a private university in the United States, I'm the beneficiary of the most elite slices. Not quite as elite as Princeton's and Yale's and Harvard's may be, but nevertheless, Columbia gets some pretty juicy slices of alternative assets which ordinary investors aren't available to them, and that's what floats my boat, right? So I don't, and I find that strategy better than the sort of preaching from the outside from a high tower, because I don't feel myself in that way. And that's, I say, the move, right? The move is to the inside systematically. It's also the polycrisis idea itself is also not, as it were, something that flies in from a very high intellectual vantage point, but is more actually a summation, kind of in an imminent way, of the crisis that so many of us think of ourselves as experiencing. And I've always been I think, encouraging and explicit about the idea that this also extends to the mental health crisis, which if you're running the HR department of a very large organization right now, is a non-trivial part of your world. And I've spoken to business partners who sell assets, who sell products that relate to the emotional and mental health crisis of the world since COVID, right? And so for me, it's imminent even at that level. And I'm not so I would insist on this, and this may sound to you like a cop-out, but and this is part of my Keynesianism, there's a very powerful line for me in Keynes where he says that part of my politics is about avoiding a situation in which there are barricades. Because if there were barricades, I would know which side I would have to choose. And I'm very aware of that, of the force of that logic. My politics is in part an effort to try, and my contribution, such as it is part of an effort to try and construct a world in which that final choice, which is of course beloved of a certain revolutionary politics and a radical politics, doesn't arrive. Because at that moment, I'm honest enough to know what side of this game that I'm broadly speaking situated on. And de facto, whether we like it or not, once you're in a place like this, you're not easily going to shake off the effects of being Michael Bloomberg's guests here. So to answer the question here, the thing I really wish I had understood earlier in my career is actually the tonic effect of being in the public sphere. And I spent many less happy years of my career. And I also think less intellectually productive years in terms of publishing output, just quantifiably less productive years of my life, my working life, but also just my life in general, and this goes to the mental health point, locked in a more rigid, less expansive position as a speaker and a contributor. And that has to do with lots of different things, biography and so on. It also has to do structurally with the way in which British universities are set up. Oxbridge sounds like the Ivy League, but it really actually functions in a completely different way. If you've ever had any exposure to it, it is a beehive. It really is a highly structured beehive. You are a very small cog in a very big machine, highly functioning. It doesn't promote ego. It doesn't promote the outward-facingness that the big American universities with their professional schools and their platforms and their interdisciplinarity do. And I missed phase after phase of the new electronic social media revolution. I did not blog the first generation. I'm very late to Twitter. But they were literally a kind of last-ditch effort by my then early teenage daughter to say, "Dad, you're so bloody depressed, you should try this. Like, maybe this will make you saner." Like, I literally got Twitter prescribed as a as a remedy, and I really think that's a question that I wish, not because I advocate like being out there all the time on every score, but I do ultimately think that intellectual life of which academic life is a part, and that in itself is an important thing to understand. Intellectual life of which academic life is a part is public and social and collective. And the bigger and broader, allowing fully for the critique I'm sensing here of like the power and the hierarchy with which the public sphere is shot through as well, but moving out from the purely academic realm into a broader public, however you choose it. It doesn't have to be Davos or fancy magazines like Foreign Policy. It can be all sorts of different avenues that take whatever you're doing in the confines of the academy and link it to some life beyond. And it could be like group therapy. It could be some community activism. It could literally be child rearing. For a long time, for many of us, it has to be. But like that connection is healthy. It certainly has been for me. And that I didn't know until I regret how long it took me to discover that. And Cam and Foreign Policy, I mean, seriously, I'm never giving it up, because for me, we were talking about it earlier on. It was a big opening to find a venue. I tried various other ones, which are fairly obvious and they're far more stilted, much less mobile. It's makes a huge difference writing for Foreign Policy than for writing for Foreign Affairs. And FP is a natural home, and I owe FP a great deal, because it was one of the things that pushed me out there, and it's been really healthy.
Well, that's sort of related to the answer I would give myself to the question, because it sounds like it was also directed at me there. I'm happy to try to answer or offer an answer, because if I try to think about what I wish I knew earlier in my career, it's not unrelated to what Adam was just saying. I mean, two thoughts come to mind, which are sort of may seem to contradict each other. The first is, I sort of found my way to professional life after some delay after school. I sort of had an extended time as a graduate student in Europe, and by the time I sort of had a proper office job, it's sort of several years had gone by since I graduated college, and understanding the demands of a professional life in that way at all, it took me a little while to understand, and that a professional job would add, it had certain sorts of demands on how you acted and what you did and the sorts of tasks you performed and the expectations of what those tasks would be. And it took me maybe a little longer to absorb that information and to sort of realize that. I mean, the second point, though, would be that I wish I understood then as well, would be that it doesn't really matter. None of that really matters, because for all those expectations and all those thoughts about what you ought to be doing, what you should be doing, and how you should be doing it, and what your bosses may or may not want you to do, and what you think your peers are doing or should be doing. I mean, you're ultimately going to be doing what you yourself should be doing. I mean, you'll find your way to that, and I mean, in this case, it involved starting this podcast, and it involved working with Adam on pieces for Foreign Policy. But however, you can't pretend to be doing what you ought to be doing, and you'll figure out what that is. And so for all the sorts of questions that may arise in a certain way, it's sort of obvious from the start, deep in some way. So yeah,
explore.
Yeah, but I think the exploration for this evening is over, unfortunately. So we do need to wrap up. But it's I think I speak for both of us when I say thank you to Johns Hopkins for having us. Thank you to Michael Bloomberg for hosting us as well. And yeah, thanks. Thank you to you, Adam. Thank you to all of you, and for all the questions. And thank you for listening. Yeah, and see you at the next time we're in town.
Thank you, Cam.
Yeah.
On behalf of the Johns Hopkins SAIS community, I'd like to give another round of applause to Adam and Cameron and the FP team for their partnership. This has been an excellent event. I'd also like to give a special thank you to Rob Sachs, who without you, this event we wouldn't be here. So thank you, Rob. You are the real MVP. Everybody, please have a good evening and get home safe. Thank you very much.